Bonjour à tous. Aujourd'hui, on va parler de chapitre 2.2, which has to do with asking for and giving information. Now, the way that they have this set up is a lot of information at once. So I'm going to separate it into three separate sections. The first section is a review of our numbers 1 to 30, and then we're going to learn new numbers 31 to 100, 1,000, and then 1 million. The second section is the calendar. So we're going to learn the dates, how to say the days of the week, the months, the seasons, and telling time. And then in the third part, we have a new irregular verb, avoir, as well as expressions to discuss our school schedules. These three sections will all have their own quiz, so be aware of that. Instead of one quiz over all of this, each section is going to have their own quiz. Alright, première partie de chapitre 2.2, reviewing our numbers 1 to 30, as well as our new numbers 31 to 100, 1,000, and 1 million. Let's go ahead and get started. Again, this is a review. The first part, répétez-moi 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. All right, we shall be able to answer this question. Please answer this question. Tu as quel âge? Tu as quel âge? And again, when answering, we say j'ai, our number, and then on. J'ai 11 ans, j'ai 12 ans, etc. All right, let's move on to our 20s. Prononcé, pronounced as vent. Répétez-moi vent, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. Again, this is pretty easy because we have to remember, this is supposed to say 21, désolé. This is pretty easy. Couple reasons. One, we have to remember that we have this and here, 20 and 1. And then the rest of them just continue on with our numbers, and they're connected by a dash. Remember that this dash is part of the spelling, so on a quiz or a test, I need you to put that dash for it to be correct. All right, next we have our 30s. We have not learned our 30s. This is some new information for you. However, it's pretty easy because it follows the same pattern. Répétez-moi 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39. All right, next we have our 40s. And again, these are easy because they follow the exact same pattern. Répétez après moi, s'il vous plaît. 40, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. Excuse me. Let's continue on. 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49. And next, we have our 50s, which again follow the exact same pattern. Répétez-moi 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59. And then we have our 60s, which follow, you guessed it, the same pattern. Remember that we do not pronounce this X. It actually turns more into a Z sound. Répétez-moi, 60. 60. 61. 62. 63. 64. 65. 66. 67. 68. 69. All right, after this is where things start to get a little bit funky because for our 70s, they don't follow the same pattern. They continue counting. Instead of going back to 1, they continue on with 10. So instead of 70, we're really saying 60-10. Répétez-moi, 70, 61, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79. Alright, and things just continue to get weirder because our 80s are 4 20s. 2, 4, 6, 8. 4 times 20 is 80. That's where they get this. 80 is 80. And then they kind of follow our old pattern. Répétez-moi, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89. All right, and then the 90s, again, are a little bit weird because instead of going back to 1 for 91, they continue on with the 80 thing and continue on counting 10, 11, 12, etc. All right, répétez après moi 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99. Notice how in 91 we do not have an A there, an ET. However, we don't have one for 81 either, but we do have them for 71, 61, 51, and all the way down. So starting with 81 and 91, we do not have that A for the 98, 91 and 81. All right, as a summary, en résumé, répétez après moi 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and then for 100 we have 100. Think of this like percent. If I have 50%, half, 50%, I have 50 out of 100. 50 per 100%. For 1,000, I have 1000. And then for 1,000,000, I have 1,000,000. For 100 and 1000, if I'm talking about 100 or 1,000, I can just say 100 or 1000. For example, 101 is 101, 1001, etc., etc. However, if I'm talking about 200 or 2,000, that's when I put a number in front. 200, 2000, etc. All right, if you have not been asked to take notes on telling time yet, you can stop here. If you have been asked to take notes on telling time, you can go ahead and continue on. All right. Telling time focuses around this question. This question is not in your notes. However, please write it down and what it means. Quelle heure est-il means what time is it? Quelle heure est-il? Répétez après moi, s'il vous plaît. Quelle heure est-il? Then we have some important vocabulary. We have heure with an S in apostrophe, with an S in parentheses. For noon, we have midi. Think midday, midi. For midnight, we have minuit, which looks very similar. For AM, we have du matin, du matin. And for PM, we have du soir. All right, répétez-moi s'il vous plaît. Heure, midi, minuit, du matin, du soir. All right, our formula for telling time goes like this. First, we have ile plus the number of our hours, ile. Then we have the word heure with that S in parentheses. We'll talk about why in a little bit. And then we have the number of our minutes. So go ahead and take a second to think, how do we say 7 in French? How do we say 45 in French? I'll give you a moment to do that. All right, to say that it is 7:45 in French, we start off with il est, our number of hours, il est sept, our word heure, and then our minutes. So all together, il est 7h45. It is 7 hours 45, basically. Il est 7h45. When written, heure can be abbreviated as H, lowercase h. For example, 10H30 means 10:30. Instead of the semicolon, or is that a colon? One of the, instead of the two dots, in French we'd use an H. All right, we say heure without the S only when we're talking about 1 a.m. or 1 p.m. For example, 1:20. Il est 1h20. Il est 1h20. Notice too that when we're talking about time, we use UNE, not UN. We'll talk about why in class. When we're talking about time, we use UNE, not UN, like our number 1. We use heure with an S, no pronunciation change between them, but written, it matters. We say heure with an S for everything else. For example, 2:20, il est 2h with an S, il est 2h20. All right, the French use both the 12-hour clock and the 24-hour clock, what we often call military time. It is used most in public announcements such as bus, train, and plane schedules, movie, television, and radio listings, sporting events, and the operation hours of certain businesses. To convert the time on the 24-hour clock to the 12-hour clock, you have to subtract 12. I don't know why that's so off. Désolé. It's supposed to be right in here. So you subtract 12. All right. So if we have that it is 17:30, we have to subtract 12 from this. I'll give you a moment to do that. 17 minus 12. If you got that it was 5:30 p.m., you're right. When not using military time, I believe this is a typo in your notes. Make sure you cross out, I think I say conversational time, which we'll get to. When not using military time, it is important to include whether you're talking about the morning or the evening, just like AM and PM. So when we're not using this military time, it's important to say whether we're talking about 5 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock at night, just like we would say 5 a.m. or 5 p.m. So 5:15 a.m., il est 5h15 du matin. It is 5:15 in the morning. For 5:15 p.m., il est 5h15 du soir. It is 5:15 in the evening. All right. You also need to be familiar with what we call conversational time. If you pay attention, your parents might use this. Definitely your grandparents would use this. Even in English, we use it. In English, I'm part of the generation where we grew up with digital watch faces. I know how to tell time on an analog clock, a circular clock. So I don't really use it, but I do have to teach it to you. So in French, again, this is not used by a lot of young people, you, me, our generations. But many older people still use it, so I want you to be familiar with it. Again, stressing this, be familiar with these expressions. You don't need to use them on your homework, your quizzes, or your tests. Be familiar with them. If you want to try it out and use it, by all means do so. But back in the day when you had only analog clocks, only big circular clocks that didn't give you the exact time down to the second, and you couldn't just look at your wrist and say, oh, it's 9:13 in the morning right now, which is a true statement. You would just glance at your watch and say, oh, it's 15 past. Oh, it's half past. Oh, it's quarter till, etc., etc. So it's just kind of a general estimation. And if you pay attention to your parents or your grandparents, they will most likely say this to you because that's what they grew up with. All right, quarter past is a quart. A quart. For example, 5:15. 5h15. 5h15. Half past is et demi. Et demi. For example, 2:30. 12h30. 12h30. And then quarter till or quarter to, we actually go up to the next hour and we say minus 1/4 or minus 15. So 1:45 is actually douze moins le quart. So 1:45 is actually 2 o'clock minus 15 minutes. And again, in English, this is what you would say as well. It's not that strange. If I were to say quarter to, I would say quarter to 2. Even though it's 1:45, I'd say quarter to 2. It's a quarter of an hour until 2 o'clock. 1/4 of an hour is 15 minutes. All right, and that is all that I have for you today. We're going to be talking about chapter 2.2, the deuxième partie, the second part, a little bit later on. Au revoir, à bientôt.